Welcome to the Quickie Podcast, the daily interview show where we talk to graphic designers about their journey to the creative field. And we do it in 30 minutes or less. So, are you ready for a Quickie?
Good morning, Nathan. How are you, sir?
Doing well, and you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to have you on the show.
Same here, bud.
You ready for a quickie?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Attaboy. Well, briefly tell the listeners about yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Nathan Royce. I'm currently a creative director at R&R Partners, working on primarily digital, but also broadcast and traditional content as well for our book of clients. And been in Silicon Valley the past 10 years, been at Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, making rounds as a creative. And I often lovingly put it as I went from the Silicon Shuffle to the Las Vegas Hustle. So moved out here and moved out to the desert, spread some wings and get some freedom to think and see what we can do together.
I like that. So what is the current temperature right now in Las Vegas?
Currently 90 degrees and sunny at 10:17 a.m. Yeah, the heat hasn't been too bad, to tell you the truth. It's been nice coming from a place where it's between 56 degrees and 63 degrees throughout the year. It's nice to feel some real heat, a little bit of change of temperature.
Nice. And I'm up in Vancouver, BC here, and I go from a place where it's like, 15 degrees Celsius and you need a coat and sweater in the morning to 30 degrees at the afternoon where you're significantly overdressed.
Yeah, no, weather happens. Just kind of go for it.
Definitely.
We all take that chance every morning we walk out the door.
That's it. We take the risk to leave the house. So I want to dive back even further and ask you about your childhood. I want to know, do you feel that you had a creative childhood and what might have made it that way?
Yeah, I think that I was really lucky to have parents who were allowed me to explore kind of geeky things and things that weren't of the mainstream and pop culture when I was really young. I remember when, all my friends wanted to play baseball and football and all that. I actually wanted to go roller skating. I spent most of my childhood as a competitive roller speed skater.
No way.
Yes. And also a trumpet player. So that was my other thing is my parents raised me to be a professional trumpet player. So I should be sitting in a pit orchestra in a symphony right now, but I actually found that kind of that creative side of me that was through music for most of my life growing up, ended up emerging as also a visual creative outlet for me as I grew into my kind of young adulthood. And, I grew up studying music, playing music. That was my thing, what I was supposed to do. And I ended up going away to college and, at Western Michigan University, and I only made it 2 semesters. And it was basically said, you don't have to stop playing trumpet, but you can't do it here. So, I needed to find something else to do, man. And so, there's just been a lot of different instances throughout my young childhood where, I was given the opportunity to pursue, music or to pursue, taking the toaster apart and trying to put it back together or, different curiosities you have as a kid. And now as a father, it's something that, I try to do better as well for my children is to allow them to kind of pursue those curiosities because I think, it ends up shaping who you become as and how open you are to that into your, your teenage years and, your young adult years and whatnot. So, I was put in fine arts camps in middle school and things like this. So I was around other kids who I saw it as kind of a world of misfit toys. And I've always kind of felt like that in a lot of ways. And, being able to have a family that let me get involved into that and be okay with being different and thinking differently, was something that was just almost, it's just very supported throughout my childhood.
So you're always encouraged to really dive into something that you wanted to know more about or you wanted to experience or learn about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was different, coming from my parents' perspective. My father is a certified rocket scientist. So he is a doctorate of aeronautical engineering and worked worked for General Motors you decided to build, motors instead of missiles, which certainly respectful. Worked for General Motors for, over 30 years, probably 35 years. And so for him to have, I'm an only child too. So for him to have a son, I could barely pass, just basic arithmetic for whatever reason, and certainly algebra. And when things started getting conceptual like that is where I just fell off. And so I think for him, he knew at a young age that I wasn't going to really fit that, I guess, family mold of being very, I'm somewhat mechanically inclined, but I'm not mathematically inclined by any means. So he knew that I was going to need to find a different way. And that's why they led me to explore a lot.
Yeah, that academic path just didn't let you up.
Yeah, well, I thought about it in different ways. I approach things from academics. Even my work that I do, today, I approach from a art and science point of view. And again, a lot of this stems from my childhood. My father and I remember having a discussion when I was very young, maybe 7 years old, and there was an article in the paper about the first personal computers coming out where you could make art on the computers. And my dad and I having a discussion about, he thought that it wasn't, or actually at the time I thought that it wasn't art because it was done on a computer. And my dad argued, well, what is a paintbrush? He said a paintbrush is a piece of technology. It's an older piece of technology, but such as a mouse at the time or a screen or whatever that is. So, and I think when you layer in that artistic kind of foundation with, in our case today with business goals and with allowing to actually do research and to have hypotheses about the work and the art that we're creating and how that drives business, that still very much plays into kind of who I am and how I approach the work with my teams and with the agency is, and a lot of what I found is that intersection between art and science is where like beautifully crafted, commerce can happen. And I think that there's a wonderful balance between artistic integrity and also driving business goals for different brands.
So true. Really well said, Nathan. I want to ask you if in that, in those younger years, when was the moment that you started really noticing design and art or the creative around you? Was there a moment that you remember where a switch just flipped for you?
Yeah, well, I was an 80s kid, so I grew up and, before cable and all of that, but I grew up playing Legos, in front of the screen. I was an only child, and so, I would sit there and I would make planes and different things with the Legos and, the TV would either be on or I'd be watching it. So I guess some of the first things I noticed were like the local, cause I grew up in Detroit, right? So all of the local used car dealerships, like the local commercials they would put out and all of the jingles that they would have in there. And I would go around and still to this day, oddly enough, I had a conversation in an airport with a guy from Detroit 2 days ago, and we were going through all the old jingles from all the old 80s commercials, and thought that it was interesting that a jingle was actually something that kept me. I still remember phone numbers from the 80s because of those things. And I think that was something, because I was so musically inclined and kind of auditory focused, like that drew me into the visuals of what that meant and learning to see how sound and audio, I guess, enhanced the visuals that were being seen on the screen and how it was like a dance, between the visuals and the audio. And, so yeah, I guess that would have been my first one, was just playing Legos in front of the TV and, in between G.I. Joe and Mask and Silverhawks and all that, these little local commercials would come on. And, it's funny now because my kids, they see them, they call them commercials. And they are, when they were really young, they kind of understand that I'm in that business now. My daughter's 11 and my son's 7, but, they're convinced for so long that the TV was broken, because they would be watching something and then it would just cut to these, all the mid-roll commercials and everything. So the format is becoming like a big thing, with the younger generations who just don't get that, and the laugh tracks and all of that. So, I was definitely a 1980s TV kid. So that's where it all came.
So Nathan, you opened this box. Hit me with a jingle.
Oh man. Just dial 988-2300 Empire,
Oh,
boom, call
yes.
Empire today. Empire carpet, you know, like
That's
that
so true.
is,
Even I
it's
know
in
that
my,
one.
oh,
Holy.
you know that one
Yeah,
too.
for
Yeah. So
sure.
like I can pull, and there's like, you know, little local ones from Detroit and all that,
Yeah.
but I think there's something to be said for jingles and music still. And I don't know, maybe this is a far out prediction, but maybe we'll see the return of jingles,
Ooh, the
coming back
return
into
of
play
jingles.
eventually. You never know.
Never
Never know.
know. Um, so Nathan, who are some of the designers and brands that you look up to and closely follow, and what about them do you like?
Um, so I think that there's definitely certain designers. I don't see designers as an occupation. I see it as a way of approaching life and
Hmm.
a way of approaching challenges with the intention of improvements. I think certainly like the old school, like David Carson, like the stuff he did with Ray Gun was super impactful on me. That was so punk rock as a kid, like seeing like, you know, growing up with mostly seeing, you know, car ads and things like that, you know, which are just kind of block text and all of that, like seeing like the work, how David, you know, just was able to kind of deconstruct and do all that. Um, I think that, you know, one of my biggest influences, and I don't know if you call him a designer or, but he is in his own way, but, you know, Alex Bogusky has been certainly a figure of, and I know that you're not supposed to have heroes as an adult and you're not supposed to look up to people so much, but I do, you know, in a lot of different ways as a person and as a businessman and as a creative. He, in my, you know, in my eye, nobody's perfect, but in my eyes, he's somehow figured out that
Hmm.
perfect balance between finding cultural insights and being, yeah, you know, walking around the world with his eyes open and seeing opportunities with people and how they're interacting, and then being able to actually craft together stories and execute on the appropriate channels in the right ways. Like, you know, he's someone that I have certainly always admired. And to this day, I try to keep him in my head as I'm making decisions now as a creative director. And, you know, harking back to things that we did back in Crispin days, you know, all
Hmm.
those guys, Jeff Benjamin, Rob Riley, Andrew Keller, Matt Walsh, Tiffany Rolfe, all of them like really are in my head on a daily basis and help kind of guide the decisions I'm making. Um, so yeah, I think, you know, I guess in terms of designers, I think, you know, Sagmeister had a huge impact on me in the past, and his kind of shocking ability to, it became about the idea and not just the execution.
Hmm.
But the execution always supported what that idea was, and it was very immediate, it was very deliberate. That's something that I certainly appreciate today, and even the means that, you know, the ephemeral content that's being put on Snap and IG stories and Facebook stories and all that, that immediacy and that kind of impact, is something that, you know, maybe we've come full circle back to, you know, print and whatnot, but, um, you know, the idea that a single image can tell that story, you know, if it's done right. And those have always been my favorite designers, have been the ones that have removed the clutter,
Hmm.
and kind of removed the noise and just kind of got at the point. And it was a clear message. And, you know, I'm a bit of a minimalist at heart. And it doesn't mean I just like minimal things. I just to like, in terms of my design aesthetics and the functionality, um, I prefer them to be streamlined and to be impactful. And
Hmm.
because my design background comes from graphic design and a visual communication format, that when I was studying at College for Creative Studies in Detroit, under the chair Doug Kaiser at the time, um, you know, we really, that's where it all kind of came from, was that kind of school of thought.
Man, those are some amazing names that you dropped there. Super talented people with, that injected their personality and their life into their work.
Yeah, and that was one of the big things for me is that, you know, you can go through the advertising or the design industry and check the boxes, and you can, you know, it'll still be frustrating and stressful, and
Hmm.
but it is at any, no matter how you look at it. But I think that the designers, I mean, the creatives in general that I've been fortunate enough to have been at the right time and the right place and to work with have, um, you know, been the ones who aren't just going to do a job.
Hmm.
They actually are using kind of our superpowers and the gifts that they've all been given to be able to make a difference and to say something and do something that matters, and not just put another ad out there, not just to put another design out there, but, you know, something that is culturally relevant, and can live on, you know, something that people are going to be talking about after the campaign's over, you know, in 6 weeks. Like, what will be that story next year, a couple years later? Will people hark back and use that as reference, as like a paradigm shift, or, you know, kind of a new type of way of thinking for the industry? And I think, you know, that those are the big swings that I'm trying to take here with R&R at the industry is, you know, and the exciting part is, you know, taking all of the things that I've learned from my heroes in the design industry and in the creative industry, and help apply that to a community here that is thirsty for that, you know, and wants that. And, you know, I've never been more excited to be able to take those things and help apply them here.
That's cool. I like the word that you used to describe it. You know, they're using their superpowers.
Yeah.
I like that.
So yeah, that's something that came out of Facebook actually. And there's kind of a belief that, you know, everyone is given a superpower, you know, from the universe. And it's like that thing that you can do better than a million other people. And I think one of the things as a creative, whether you're a designer, a copywriter, or you're in the industry, allowing that superpower to speak is like your franchise. That is like your value. That is what makes you different from like any other designer or any other creative. And even in the communities here at R&R Partners, like that's the cultural shift I'm trying to change. Is just because you have a title doesn't mean that you're passionate about a specific thing about that title or about that role. Right. So I've been trying to get to know everybody as individuals, you know, and find out who they are and what moves them outside of the office as well as inside the office, and try to find a parallel path to get them kind of going that direction. For sure.
You had said in an answer for the last question about, you know, Snapchat and the instant immediacy going on, and you had mentioned the word print. I want to ask you, where does print stand, and where does packaging stand in this digital world?
Yeah, so I don't think that will ever totally go away. It's just a different part of the experience, right? It's the same voice. It's just through a different window or a different doorway. Whether that voice is coming through an ephemeral digital piece on Snap or IG stories, or whether that's coming through an outdoor piece or a print piece, it's the same personality, the same voice. Is just being projected onto a different surface. And something that I just did a kind of one of my little TED Talks here at the agency last week. And that came up because all of the same talents and gifts that we've been given for an eye for design, an eye for typography, and you know, a mind for writing, all of those kind of, you know, traditional skill sets that we came up learning, whether you went to college or art school or self-taught, those are still just as important and just as impactful today as they have ever been. Because the same values, the same rules of communication and visual communication and how people see image and what that makes them feel still are just as important today. It's just the screen or the doorway into that, you know, might be a little different. And, you know, for a static, you know, Instagram story that people see for 15 seconds, you get the right image combined with the right message, the right typography and movement. And that is just as impactful as a print ad could be in a magazine. Totally. Obviously it travels a lot easier, you know, than a magazine. But, you know, all of those principles, I think from a designer's mind, should be something that's embraced. You know, I know that I'm, you know, starting to become a little bit older in the industry now after 20 years. And it's like, I have, you know, people talking to me as like, oh, are you, you know, is design becoming irrelevant? And, you know, I like designing print, and, you know, what if I don't have a job in 5 years? And it's like, you know, it's, you know, print and digital media is kind of, you know, digital is the screen of our generation. It is it's the canvas of our generation, right? So years ago in other generations, someone had to figure out how to sell a chair in a newspaper, a little print, postage size print kind of, you know, stamp that was in a newspaper. And it's like, that must have seemed impossible for someone who the design field didn't even exist, or copy. They're just
For sure.
drawing a picture of a chair and saying, buy now, putting the price on it. Right. And expect that would work. Right. And then there was a whole nother generation after that had to figure out how to sell that same chair over the radio, right, in 30 seconds. And you can't even see the chair, man, and they had to figure out, like, how do you use this new medium to be able to create commerce, and in an artistic way still make it entertaining, and whatnot. And then there's a whole nother generation after that had 30 seconds to sell a chair on a screen, that couldn't sit in or anything. And, you see where I'm going. And then, desktop computers, laptops, mobile now. And so, I always say that, we should be embracing this as kind of a generation that if we've been in it for 20 years, like, we should have a lot to add, and a lot of things to be able to help share with the younger generation who's learning visual communication with ephemeral content and mobile as being like that core source of, like, hey man, that is the cool new concert poster. That is the rad new zine that, is like punk rock. That is the new, and so it's those same stories, those same messages. It's just a different experience and a different doorway of, like, experiencing those stories. Mm-hmm. So I think that print is more important than ever. And certainly the thought process around print is still just as valuable today in a digital world as it has been before digital even existed.
And have you had any recent interactions or examples or seen or witnessed projects that worked with print and social in tandem that were executed well, or anything that you've seen, using mobile apps to interact with print or anything like that?
Yeah, certainly. And we're working on some things here, but more on an environmental basis. But I had one of my great friends at Facebook. I don't know if I should mention names, but he was working with a client on essentially a social campaign. And they loved the social campaign so much that they backed it into broadcast, which also backed it into a coffee book that ended up kind of, sitting on people's table that applied to the brand, and it made sense. And it extended what happened on broadcast and digital. And I think that was really the interesting thing. And to see, certainly working at social platforms over the past years, is to see if you can really nail a social content franchise, like a good creative idea, it can live as broadcast, right? And I've seen it happen where they've, where in many traditional agencies, everyone's focused on the big spearhead TV spot that's going to change everything and set everything else, and then everything else just kind of like trickles down, right? But I've seen it work from the other way, and that's, where something, there's just been a great series of posts from a brand, and we end up turning that into print. We end up turning that into, other things as well. So I think that's one of the big changes too. And there's nothing to say that, a great social campaign couldn't come from a great print ad, right? If the idea is right and you get it and you can just like continually riff off that and just create consistent creative and content around that. I think that, print will always have a importance in society, certainly for as long as we'll be alive. But
definitely,
I think, it'll always be around and play an important role.
Yeah. So you were at Facebook previously, and I heard that Facebook actually put a magazine out within the last year or something like that. Do you know anything about that, or were you a part of that?
A magazine, like a public facing magazine?
Yeah, I thought, I don't know if it was distributed publicly or if it was just internally or just for their business clients. But there was a business related Facebook publication.
Oh yeah. So I haven't seen anything that's been public, but certainly during my years there, they've, the different teams, like Instagram came out with an incredible flip book when they first came on board. And so the great thing about Facebook is they have this incredible analog lab on their in their Menlo Park campus, and it was the first place that my buddy Tom Gilmartin and ended up being my manager at the end. That's the first place he took me. They had offset printers. They had courses there on sign painting, bookmaking courses, calligraphy. all that. And it is firmly grounded at the heart of their headquarters, like in their classic campus.
That's insane.
And it's beautiful, man, because, the idea that, it makes you ask, like, is this a tech company? Like, it's just like, it's just a creative company,
Yeah.
and it was such a beautiful realization to be starting this tech company on my first day, like over 6 years ago, and being taken to the print shop, and looking through books, being able to print books. Anybody could go in there. I think it's changed now. They've kind of buttoned it up, but at that time, anybody could go in. You could print your own card. They had cards like giving to people who would come visit the campus of, different small size posters that were that people would see all over the campus. And that was a beautiful, harmonious, like connective tissue between what, that company's doing and the idea of what digital kind of interactions are and what traditional and print communications are. And they take into account, just as much a serious and a love for the craft of print and traditional design at that company as they do digital. So that was phenomenal.
Incredible. Yeah. The Facebook Analog Lab. That's incredible.
Yeah. And they have people, they have instructors there. They do fine art. They do 3-dimensional pieces. They'll do different stuff around the campus. So they're really open to that stuff.
That's awesome. All right, Nathan, the next couple of questions I have for you take you down part of your career where you likely made some mistakes, learned some lessons, and I want to pull those stories and lessons out of you and share those with the audience. So what has been the most challenging time in your design career so far? Why was it challenging and how did you get through it?
Yeah, this should be easy. I should have so many to pull from. I think from a design standpoint, I think one of the big challenges, and it still exists, is the getting clients and brands to understand the value of designing for mobile still, and how a digital ecosystem really works together in totality, and not thinking about them as individual kind of platforms. So I'm thinking about design these days as organizing creative and being able to inspire creative that fits within those different organizations. Harking back, so when I was a UX designer at Crispin, we had to design some of the first Facebook apps. I don't know if you remember those. There were those things where they would basically, it was before, I think once mobile came in, they started kind of going away, but I had to come up with the UX design for Facebook for Whopper Sacrifice for Burger King, which allowed you to choose if you were able to get rid of 10 of your friends for a free cheeseburger, and kind of that cultural kind of nuance on there. But that was a big challenge because I was working off of, I was at an agency still. I wasn't even at Facebook. So I was working off of screenshots that we basically just had to pull off of live sites and be able to design the UX over the top of it and how we thought it could work. And this kind of bleeds into Facebook a little too. And I think as a designer, if you're working at the cutting edge and the cusp of kind of what's possible, you're kind of building it in flight, right? So you're getting things close enough to what you think will work with the information you have at the moment. And that's, working within that. Some designers, I think, are able to work better within that kind of void of like not knowing exactly, like you kind of have a taste. It's kind of like, when a great band, like a jam band plays together, like they don't know, like they kind of know the backbone of what they're doing, but then they're just able to riff, right? Like a good guitarist or a good, like, horn player or something. They're just able to kind of like, they all just kind of feel each other out and they just kind of run it forward. Right. And I think, with UX design in that moment, and then even today working with these platforms and designing stuff for them, if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable and you're feeling like you're moving into uncharted territory, like, and a little bit scared, like that's a good thing, right? Because it gives you the opportunity to write down the questions that you need to learn, but also make something that someone hasn't done before. Perhaps as a designer, you've connected two ideas that or two different pieces of work that somehow, open up a whole new paradigm shift of thinking, right? So being able to draw those together, I think is very, very important.
Oh, such a good one. So then, the challenge for you in that was trying to work and create in that void.
Right. With ambiguity, and I think there's some designers that, really enjoy and find not safety, but find comfort in structure, and being kind of knowing like exactly what to do and exactly where this is going to be and exactly how it works and all of that. And there's other designers I think that I've met that kind of have a thirst for that ambiguity, that void, and that you don't know something, to kind of pioneer into that uncharted territory. And those have always been the most challenging, I think, situations for me as a designer, but also the most exciting. Some of them have ended up in patents or getting made or winning awards, and, most of them have ended up failing. However, the questions that you are forced to ask yourself or to get answered when you're moving into uncharted territory helps you grow as a person and as a designer and overall as your career. So
really well said. Definitely. So now I want to get a little bit more specific. I want to talk about a design or a project, a particular one that you were a part of that did not go well or bring the desired result. What was that like? How did that feel? Can you take us to that story?
Yeah, there was one about a year ago that my buddy Alan Holmes and I had been working on at Facebook, and it was something that we had developed on the fringes. It wasn't something we were briefed on. It's not something that we were told to work on. It was just an opportunity that we both happened to see at the same time, and we started working towards. And it got to the point where what we wanted to do is basically package it up into a deck where we could show the idea, state the challenge. Here's the idea. Here's how it's solving it. And then being able to show kind of the mock-ups and everything of how that would work in mobile. This was actually for a messenger kind of idea for a messenger bot. And so we put it together, and we were just stoked on it. And we took it to internal, and Andrew Keller is still there, but he was running Creator Shop at that time. And he was all stoked on it. Everyone was stoked on it. We got it to the client. One of the clients was stoked on it. The other one wasn't. And, it was just one of those situations where it was like, if we could have, if I could have just swapped like those two clients and the other one would have been stoked on it, then it probably would have gone forward. But I think that it's one of those scenarios where you also have to keep a sense of humor. And, I have the problem of falling in love with work. Not just my work, but I fall in love with other people's work too, and I think that because you take it personally, and I think of what I'm doing as more than just a job, it's what we get up and spend our day doing every day, man, so I try to make it what it is. We learned several things from that, not only about the logistics about bots and how they work, but we learned about how to package things. And so the best thing that you can do from that, and the best respect that you can show a project that gets killed, is to learn from it, and to do the respect of carrying on the story from that project that died, carrying it on to other projects and other things, and learning from that. So, you know how to better set things up, and kind of able to, not make the same mistake twice. But I've certainly made the same mistake twice, so shame on me about certain things. But
yeah, sometimes you just see it as soon as you're in it, you've already made a decision, and you go, "Oh, damn, I'm here again."
Yeah, it's like I remember I did that like 5 years ago, and the hell with me for doing the same thing. But sometimes it's just how it goes.
Yeah, Nathan, what's something that you're struggling with in your design career right now?
Getting the design to align with client KPIs, because there comes a certain point at a level with a client where they don't care about design. I mean, they do, they want it to look good, but any design change ends up becoming a conversation about, well, how does this hit my goal that I set for you? How does this hit this KPI? How, and doing that. And I think that, the user experience of the design of some of our digital properties that we're working on here at R&R have a lot of opportunity to evolve with our business goals. And I think that working between developers, designers, and clients, that's kind of my biggest challenge as a creative director right now, is just aligning everyone. And it gets to a point too where my difficult thing is like, how far do you just try to get everyone aligned before like an idea just loses itself and it just becomes watered down, and the design, the design of an idea just becomes, kind of muddled. And I think that's something we're working through, not just from a graphic design and UX design perspective, but how we're designing our working processes and our creative processes. And that's how I'm kind of looking at design these days, is designing, better ideas and more beautiful creative through processes and through making sure that the research and the client goals are matched with what our designs are looking like. And because at the end of the day, I think I've always struggled with this as, coming up as a designer, is finding that kind of that line between art and design and what that is. And everyone will define this differently, but how I've personally kind of find this is, design is communicating a very specific and clear message, where fine art is leaving interpretation open, for people to decide what they think of it or what it means to them. And one of the challenges and the curses of being a designer or just a creative and having a client is being able to communicate that effectively and showing that a monetary value from a subjective point of view, which creativity and design is sometimes seen as subjective. And so what I've been trying to do is work with our research teams here and working to have agendas that are based off data, so that we can justify design decisions that we're making based on insights and research, and how this could affect, the monetary side of things or the engagement side of things, like whatever a client's, KPI is. So that's kind of my big challenge now and it's a fun challenge, like it's because I think that, once people are understanding that workflow and seeing how, once a client can kind of understand like, wow, creativity can actually build business, and good design can actually move business. And
For sure.
It's a realization for someone who's sitting in a suit and looking at spreadsheets, that they're like, wow, it clicks something on, and that also builds trust, and it builds freedom, right? Freedom is a result of the trust that you have with a client for them, that they trust you, and that there's a crazy idea, but we've made good decisions in the past. So let's try this design. Let's try this
roll
idea,
with it,
whatever it is. And go with it. Right.
Yeah. All right. I want to turn this bus around for you. And I want to ask you now about a project that you've been a part of that you're the most proud of.
The one project I'm most proud of. So there was a project in my previous life that we worked on. We partnered with an agency, and it was around the Affordable Health Care Act.
Okay.
And it was one of those moments where I got a call on a weekend. I think it was a Saturday at like 1 p.m. Like I was totally on week, like I got, kids, mode. Family, everything, like at the park, like, in it. Yeah. And my colleague of mine from the New York office said, hey, there's some funny business going on with the, Affordable Health Care Act. And there's a project that we can work on this weekend and get it in front of the agency and the client by Monday. And, it will save lives. And, I was like, so very interested. I was like, wow, how can we do this? And so, essentially what happened, is that for a period of time, certain administrations were essentially shutting down the Affordable Health Care Act website on the weekends for maintenance. And because, and that was where when they were getting 90% of their signups were on the weekends, right? Because people are working during the day, right? And so someone down the line decided that they would shut down on the weekends to help, to not help. So this was something that was important to me, as someone who is in advertising, someone who's a designer, someone who's a rebel, someone who cares deeply and compassionately for other people, that even if I don't understand them, and, what we did was we ended up developing a concept, a mock, and a prototype by Monday morning that went to the agency and to the client with a budget of $0, zero production dollars, and zero media dollars. And we went to market that week. We got approve off and we went live and went to market. And ultimately we were able, this bot that we had built, this AI bot that we had built, allowed people to speak to and to register for affordable healthcare for themselves, for their children, for their families. Hundreds of thousands of people were able to register for healthcare and go home safe, knowing, that they had something, to even with all of the politics that were going on at the time. It felt good to know that I and my teammates were able to use our superpowers for something that actually impacted real people, and real families. And that's, there's some other things, like I also helped work on the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge as well, which was a big one. Obviously hugely impactful on a cultural level. But that work that we were able to do with, on a weekend and actually go towards getting people healthcare there's no other feeling like that.
So was this a bot that basically would allow people to register and give information over the weekend, and then it would automatically put it through the website during the week when it was back open?
So essentially it gave you the resources and the people and the numbers to be able to call to do that. And also to, give your email address to actually, to have that conversation, to reach out to someone individually. But I mean, the positive impact is that it wasn't connected to the site, so it didn't get shut down. And that was the whole goal, right? As if government communities were shutting this down, we had to do something on the side to at least get them through that weekend, and so they can get them to the exact right person, on that next Monday morning.
Wow. That is impactful, Nathan. That was incredible. So we're at the point of the show right now for the Ask It Forward question. I've got a question for you from my last guest, and you get an opportunity to ask a question of my next guest. So it was funny that you had said that you were an avocado aficionado, because my previous guest had a question relating to guacamole. So my last guest was Marisol Ortega. She's been with Starbucks Global Creative. She's been with Amazon. She's down in Seattle, and she's a freelance designer and illustrator now. And she first wanted, part one of this question is, do you put sour cream in your guacamole?
Oh, no, never. I never taint. I am, as you said, an avocado aficionado. So I prefer as much avocado. I put a little onion, put a little lime juice, put a little tomato in there, and you're good to go, really. But however, that being said, I will say this. This is a realization. So thank you, Marisol, for the question and helping me bring awareness to my own avocado eating habits. But when I eat tacos or a burrito, I do put sour cream on it with the guacamole.
Interesting.
So maybe I should give it a shot. I don't know. Maybe I should try it out and see if it works.
Well, part two of her question was, if you don't, do you think sour cream would add to the guacamole experience?
I think it could add a certain cream factor that could warm it up a little bit and get that warm kind of creamy sensation. I think, I like my guacamole kind of chunky. So, I feel like maybe the the sour cream could possibly like maybe water it down a little bit, but I don't know. I'm gonna give it a shot.
Perfect.
I think that's an interesting conversation.
Awesome question. So, Nathan, what is the question you would like me to ask the next guest?
Oh, let's see. Do I know who the next guest is, or
No,
who the
sir.
next? I don't. Okay.
Well, I know, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. Let's see. How about this? How about baseball or roller skating? We'll do either or.
Either or, baseball or roller skating.
Yeah.
I like it.
See what they think. See if that riffs like a life story or a something off that.
I like it. Man, Nathan, you made it to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest. I really appreciate your time here.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and let me know anytime you want me to come back. Always happy to talk with you.
Awesome.